They say a woman always knows when something isn't right in her home. I used to laugh at that saying, but now, looking back, I realize it's truer than anything I've ever heard. Because before my world turned upside down, I could feel it, like a chill creeping through a door that had been left cracked open. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one early morning in Columbus, Ohio. The sunlight poured in through the lace curtains, and the smell of fresh coffee should have brought me peace. But instead of comfort, I felt dread. For over 40 years, I had been married to David Lawson. We raised children together, built routines, and shared a life that looked steady to everyone else. Yet inside these red brick walls, the house my late father left me, I could feel everything slipping away. David had grown cold. He no longer spoke to me unless it was about bills or groceries. Our dinners had turned into silence, broken only by the clinking of his fork on the plate. He spent more and more time in his office, muttering about business meetings, while I sat alone in the living room, staring at old family photos and wondering what I had done wrong. And then the worst thought crept into my mind: maybe it wasn't me at all. Maybe it was him. Backhand index pointing. Right before I begin, I want to mention that my Revenge channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. I'll be honest with you, growing old in a marriage isn't the fairy tale I once imagined as a young bride. Wrinkles where there used to be smoothness, tired legs where there was once a spring in my step, and a man who barely looked at me anymore. For a long time, I blamed myself. I told myself I wasn't exciting enough, not attractive enough, maybe even a burden. But soon, little signs began to whisper otherwise. The first time it happened, I noticed David quickly shoving his phone in his pocket when I walked into the room. His face turned pale, then forced a smile as if nothing had happened. Another time, I caught him deleting messages, his hands trembling just slightly. And then there were the bank statements, money moving around in ways I couldn't understand, accounts I didn't recognize. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear his footsteps pacing in his office, the floorboards creaking with each nervous step. Sometimes I caught the faint sound of his voice, low and sharp, as if he didn't want the walls to hear. I would lie there, my heart pounding, staring at the ceiling and wondering, what was he hiding from me? It's a strange thing, feeling invisible in your own home. The very house my father had left me, the one I thought would be my safe place, suddenly felt like a cage. I'd walk from room to room, dusting furniture, watering plants, folding laundry, but all the while, I felt like a ghost. And yet, in my bones, I knew something was coming. Have you ever had that feeling, that heavy silence in your chest, like a storm is building just beyond the horizon? That was me. Every time David avoided my eyes, every time he pushed his plate away without a word, every time his phone buzzed and he jumped like he'd been caught doing something shameful, I knew. I just didn't know what. The day it finally clicked was an ordinary Tuesday. I had been folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard his voice float down the hall. He was on the phone, his office door half shut. I tiptoed closer, my breath caught in my throat. I'll handle the house. Once she's out, everything will fall into place. My knees nearly gave out. Handle the house? Out? Who was he talking to? My heart pounded in my ears, and I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around my plate while David chatted about the stock market, acting as if nothing was wrong. My mind screamed, he's planning something. He's planning to take the one thing that means the world to me. The house wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was my father's gift. It was the place where I brought my babies home from the hospital, where we decorated Christmas trees together, where my mother's rocking chair still sat by the window. And now, the man I trusted for 42 years was plotting to steal it out from under me. I can't explain the feeling. It was heartbreak, yes, but also rage. A fire began to burn in me that night, a fire I thought had gone out years ago. I didn't sleep a wink. I lay there in the dark, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, and for the first time in decades, I realized something important. Crying wasn't going to save me. Begging wasn't going to save me. The only thing that would save me was taking action. And that's exactly what I decided to do. But before I tell you how I fought back, I have to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? If your own husband, after 42 years of marriage, began plotting to take your inheritance, would you stay silent? Or would you rise up and fight for what's yours? Because this was the moment I stopped being the quiet, forgotten wife. This was the moment Margaret Lawson began her revenge. After overhearing David's chilling words about handling the house, I tried to convince myself I had misunderstood. Maybe he was talking about taxes or insurance. Maybe my mind, heavy with age and loneliness, was making mountains out of molehills. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I studied him as he sat at the table, sipping his coffee. His eyes stayed glued to the newspaper, never lifting to meet mine. For decades, I had memorized every crease on that face, every line time had drawn. But now, when I looked at him, I saw a stranger. I forced a smile and asked, "Is everything all right, David?" He cleared his throat, folded the paper, and replied, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" His words were polite, but his tone carried the edge of someone hiding something. He wouldn't look me in the eye. That was when the cracks in my marriage, cracks I had ignored for years, suddenly became impossible to overlook. It wasn't just the late nights anymore. It was the way he treated me like an afterthought, as though my opinions no longer mattered. If I suggested a new paint color for the kitchen, he dismissed it. If I asked about his business trips, he brushed me off. And if I dared to question him twice, he snapped, his voice hard and cold. It was like living with a roommate who despised me but couldn't be bothered to leave. The neighbors in Columbus still saw us as the perfect long-term couple. People at church complimented us for lasting so long together. They didn't see the icy silence between us, the tension that lingered in every room. And they certainly didn't hear the quiet, cruel comments David sometimes whispered under his breath. I felt invisible in my own home. But the more invisible he tried to make me feel, the more determined I became to see through his lies. One evening, when he went to bed early, I tiptoed into his office. His desk was cluttered with papers, but one folder caught my eye. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling, and saw bank statements with transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Thousands of dollars moved quietly, month after month. And then there were the real estate listings, printed from a local site, circled with his black pen. A few of them even had notes scrawled in the margins, potential sale after settlement. My heart sank. There was no denying it anymore. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to take my inheritance, my father's house, and cash it out. For days after that discovery, I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life. I cooked his meals, folded his laundry, and smiled politely to friends who asked how we were doing. But inside, I was screaming. At night, I lay awake, replaying his words, staring at the ceiling, feeling betrayal like a knife twisting in my chest. The man I had loved for 42 years, the man I had grown old with, was plotting against me. Sometimes, I wondered if I was to blame. Maybe I had gotten too comfortable. Maybe he wanted excitement, something new, something I couldn't give him anymore. But then another thought would hit me, louder and stronger. No, this is greed. This is cruelty. And I will not let him take what is mine. I began watching him more closely. When his phone buzzed, I noticed how quickly he snatched it up, turning away so I couldn't see the screen. When he came home late, his shirt smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. And when I asked where he had been, he'd say, "Just business, Margaret. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." Those 4 words felt like daggers. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was insult. One Saturday, I confronted him lightly, testing the waters. "David, you've been so busy lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're imagining things. Always imagining things." He pushed past me, brushing off the question like dust on his sleeve. And that's when I realized, he thought I was weak. He thought I would never fight back. He believed I was nothing more than a tired old woman, too fragile and too afraid to stand up for myself. That assumption would become his biggest mistake. I didn't confront him again, not yet. Instead, I started my own quiet investigation. I checked the mail before he did. I watched our online banking. I kept notes in a little notebook I hid under the cushion of my favorite chair. Piece by piece, I built my case against him, and with each discovery, the fire inside me grew. Because now it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about survival. I wasn't going to let this man, the man who once vowed to protect me, strip me of the one thing my father had left me. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. But the truth? I still didn't know just how far he was willing to go. Because as I pieced together his lies, I hadn't yet realized that the storm was about to hit harder than I could ever imagine. And when it did, it wouldn't just threaten my house, it would threaten everything I had left in this life. It was late September when everything I had been suspecting finally came crashing into the open. The day had been ordinary, too ordinary. I cooked dinner, washed the dishes, and folded laundry while David locked himself in his office again. That room had become his fortress, his secret world, the place I no longer belonged. By 9 o'clock, the house was quiet. I carried a basket of clothes down the hall, thinking about whether to watch the late news or just go to bed. That's when I heard it, his voice, low and sharp, leaking through the crack of his office door. I froze. "I'll handle the house," David said, his tone icy, controlled. "Once she's out, everything will fall into place." My blood turned to ice. My knees went weak, and the basket of clothes nearly slipped from my hands. I leaned against the wall, straining to make sure I hadn't misheard. "The lawyer said it won't take long. Just a matter of time." That was it. No laughter. No small talk. Just cold calculation. I stood there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would echo down the hallway and give me away. Every instinct in me screamed to barge in and demand answers, but something stopped me. Instead, I tiptoed back, each step heavy with dread, and collapsed onto the couch in the living room. Handle the house? Once she's out? There was no mistake anymore. My husband was plotting against me. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing his words repeat like a broken record. After 42 years of marriage, after raising children together, after growing old side by side, this was how he repaid me? By planning to throw me out of the home my father left me? I pressed my pillow to my face and wept silently, afraid he would hear. But behind the tears, anger began to stir. A deep, burning anger I hadn't felt in years. In that moment, I knew my marriage wasn't just dying, it was being murdered. The next morning, I watched him at breakfast. He buttered his toast calmly, reading the newspaper as if nothing had happened. The same man who had whispered about getting me out now sat across from me, sipping coffee, pretending life was normal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that coffee mug across the room and shatter his calm facade. But instead, I stayed quiet. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, barely glancing at me. "Yes," I lied, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But inside, I was falling apart. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself I had misinterpreted things. Maybe he had meant something else. Maybe he was talking about refinancing, or taxes, or some other business matter. But the evidence kept piling up. I noticed him slipping out with folders tucked under his arm. I caught the flash of a lawyer's letterhead on his desk. And then one afternoon, when he went out to run errands, I found the courage to open his office drawers. What I saw confirmed every fear I had. Bank transfers. Large amounts, moved to accounts I didn't recognize. Legal documents with his signature. And worst of all, printouts of real estate listings in Franklin County. Some had notes scrawled in his handwriting: good resale value. Close to downtown. Potential sale after settlement. Settlement. Divorce settlement. It hit me like a punch to the chest. David wasn't just leaving me, he was planning to strip me of my home, sell it, and walk away richer. I sank into his office chair, clutching the papers, my hands shaking. My father's house. The one place that held all my memories, the place where I raised my children, the place I thought I would die in. He wanted to take it away. And that's when something shifted inside me. The tears dried. My breathing slowed. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. David thought I was weak. He thought I would cry, beg, maybe even collapse under the weight of betrayal. He thought he could outsmart me. But he was wrong. I wasn't just some old woman waiting quietly for the end. I was Margaret Lawson. I was my father's daughter. And I wasn't going to let anyone steal what was mine. Still, the fear lingered. What if he really succeeded? What if I ended up homeless, with nothing but a broken heart and a bag of clothes? The thought haunted me, but it also fueled me. I had to act. I had to find a way to protect myself. That night, I sat on the porch, rocking in my mother's old chair, staring out at the quiet Columbus Street. The air was crisp, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. I thought about my children, my grandchildren, the legacy I wanted to leave behind. And then I thought about David's smug face, whispering into the phone, convinced his plan was foolproof. That was the moment I made my decision. I was going to fight back. What David didn't know was that his betrayal had awakened something in me, a strength I thought had long since disappeared. And with that strength came a plan. But how could one woman, nearing the twilight of her life, outsmart a husband who was already 10 steps ahead? The answer would come from the most unexpected place, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. And once I made that call, nothing in our marriage would ever be the same again. After that night, when I stood frozen outside David's office, I knew I could no longer ignore the truth. But knowing something in your heart and proving it are two different battles. And if I was going to protect myself, I needed proof, cold, undeniable proof. For the next few days, I moved like a shadow through my own house. I waited until David left for his meetings, then I searched. At first, guilt gnawed at me. This was my husband, the man I once trusted with my whole heart. But every time guilt whispered, I remembered his voice saying, "Once she's out, everything will fall into place." And suddenly, my guilt hardened into determination. I started small. I checked the mail before he did. Most of it was junk, but tucked inside were bank letters addressed only to him. I opened them with trembling hands and felt my stomach drop. The accounts weren't joint. They were in his name alone, with balances higher than I expected. Money was moving in ways I didn't understand, funds shifted, withdrawals made, deposits coming from places I'd never heard of. Then came the legal papers. A letter from a law firm in Franklin County, polite but formal, regarding preliminary discussions of marital dissolution. I read those words over and over until the room spun. Dissolution. Divorce. So I hadn't been imagining it. My husband really was planning to leave me. It was late one afternoon when I stumbled upon the real dagger. I was dusting his office shelves when I noticed a folder stuffed behind a stack of old files. I pulled it out, and my hand shook as I opened it. Inside were printouts of real estate listings, houses, condos, even empty lots. Some were circled in red. Others had notes in David's sharp handwriting: good flip. Potential sale after settlement. Settlement. There was that word again. It wasn't just about leaving me. It wasn't just about ending our marriage. He was planning to take what was mine, my father's house, my inheritance, the one thing that tied me to my family's legacy. He wanted to sell it, pocket the money, and start fresh without me. I sat there at his desk, clutching those papers, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. 42 years of marriage, reduced to financial calculations and property notes. I thought about my father, how hard he had worked to buy this home. I thought about my mother rocking me to sleep in the chair by the window. I thought about bringing my babies through that front door, carrying them in my arms, their little hands clutching at my blouse. And now, the man I once trusted more than anyone was ready to sell all of it as if it were nothing. I didn't confront him that night. No, I played the part. I made dinner, asked about his day, even laughed at one of his forced jokes. But inside, my mind was racing. How much time did I have? How soon would he make his move? And what could I possibly do to stop him? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities. Divorce courts. Lawyers. Endless battles. The odds were stacked against me. He had the money, the connections, the arrogance. But then I remembered something my cousin Rachel once told me years ago when she worked in real estate law: a house is only as vulnerable as its paperwork. Protect the paperwork, and you protect everything. Those words hit me like lightning. Maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. The very next day, when David left for another meeting, I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel. My voice shook as I explained everything: the whispers, the bank accounts, the listings, the word settlement. There was a long silence on the line before Rachel spoke. "Maggie," she said softly, "you have to act fast. Transfer the house before he files. Do it legally, do it clean, but do it quietly. Otherwise, you'll lose it all." Her words terrified me. But they also gave me hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely powerless. That night, as David sat across from me at dinner, I studied him in silence. He was smug, calm, completely convinced that I was still in the dark. He asked if I had checked the property tax notices lately, casually dropping bait. I simply smiled and shook my head, pretending ignorance. If only he knew that I already had a plan forming. He believed I was the same quiet, passive wife who wouldn't fight back. But what he didn't know was that he had just awakened a side of me I had buried for decades, the side of me that was ready to protect what was mine at all costs. And as I cleared the plates from the table, one thought repeated in my mind. David Lawson is about to learn the hard way that he married the wrong woman to betray. I've always believed there comes a moment in every woman's life when she has to choose, keep living as a victim or finally take control. For me, that moment came the night I called Rachel and heard the urgency in her voice. She didn't just suggest a plan, she gave me a lifeline. Backhand index pointing. Right before I begin, I want to mention that my Revenge channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. Rachel didn't waste time. Maggie, she said firmly, the house is in your name, correct? Yes, I whispered. My father left it to me before I married David. Then you have every right to secure it. Transfer it into a trust, in your daughter's name. Do it before David files anything. Once he makes a move, it'll be too late. Her words hit me like a thunderclap. My hand shook as I gripped the phone tighter. I had never thought of taking such a step, but the truth was clear, if I didn't, everything my father worked for would be gone. The very next morning, Rachel drove down from Cleveland and met me at a quiet cafe in Columbus. She spread out the papers, her voice low as we discussed every detail. My palms were sweaty, my heart racing, but I signed the documents with a steadiness I didn't know I had. In that moment, I felt both terrified and powerful. Terrified that David might find out. Powerful because, for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him to decide my future, I was deciding it for myself. Rachel looked me in the eye and said, "It's done. The house is safe now." I can't even describe the wave of relief that washed over me. It was as if a chain had snapped. For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. That evening, David came home and asked the strangest question. "Have you thought about updating the property papers lately?" he asked, his tone casual, almost playful. My heart nearly stopped. Did he know? Had he somehow found out? I forced a smile and said, "No, I haven't touched them in years." He studied me for a moment, as though searching for cracks in my mask. Then he nodded, picked up his fork, and ate in silence. I sat across from him, pretending to be calm, but inside my chest my heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. 3 weeks later, the storm arrived. It was a gray October morning when I heard the knock on the door. A sheriff stood on my porch, holding an envelope. "Mrs. Lawson?" he asked. "Yes?" "You've been served." The world seemed to tilt as I accepted the thick stack of papers. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. There it was in black and white, David Lawson was filing for divorce. And right there on the list of marital property he demanded half of everything, including the house. I sank into a chair, my whole body trembling. This was it. The war had officially begun. When David came home that evening, he walked into the kitchen with a smug grin plastered across his face. He tossed his briefcase on the counter and leaned against the wall, watching me with narrowed eyes. "Well," he said, almost cheerfully, "I guess you know by now." I nodded, silent. "You can fight me if you want, Margaret, but it won't change the outcome. The house, the money, it all gets split. You'll get your half, I'll get mine, and then I'll be on my way." He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to beg. He was expecting the weak, fragile wife he had built in his mind. Instead, I lifted my head, forced a smile, and asked, "Would you like extra gravy with your dinner tonight?" The look on his face was priceless. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. He didn't know that while he was busy planning my downfall, I had already saved myself. But I couldn't relax yet. Because what David didn't realize was that his plan was about to collapse in front of him. And when it did, it wouldn't just destroy his scheme, it would destroy his pride. It only took a week after I was served the divorce papers for David's carefully built plan to unravel. At first, he strutted around the house like a man who had already won. He whistled in the mornings, left the legal paperwork spread across the dining table, and looked at me with a smugness that made my skin crawl. He thought the house was already his. But then the disclosures came. His lawyer had demanded a full inventory of assets, and my lawyer, Rachel's trusted colleague, handed them over. When David flipped through the paperwork, expecting to see the house listed under my name, his smug expression froze. "What is this?" he muttered, his face darkening. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the documents again. "Where is the house? Why isn't it listed here?" I sipped my tea slowly, watching him from across the table. "Because it's not mine anymore." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean it's not yours?" "Of course it's yours. You've lived here for decades." I set my cup down and folded my hands neatly. "Correction. It was mine before you. But now it belongs to our daughter." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. His face turned red, then purple, his lips pressed into a tight line. He slammed the papers onto the table so hard that the teacup rattled. "You tricked me, Margaret," he shouted. "This was supposed to be part of the settlement. You can't just give it away." I stayed calm, my voice steady. "I didn't trick you. I protected myself. The house was my inheritance. It was never yours to take." He stormed across the room, pacing like a caged animal. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, I wondered if he might actually strike me. But he didn't. Instead, he turned and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you're clever, but you're not. You've destroyed everything." "No, David," I said softly. "You did that all by yourself." For days afterward, his fury was a storm that never cleared. He slammed doors, barked into the phone with his lawyer, and sulked like a man robbed of his crown. But underneath all his rage, I saw something else: fear. Without the house, his leverage was gone. His financial scheme, whatever it had been, had collapsed. And for the first time in years, I felt the balance of power shift. I went about my days quietly, humming while I cooked, tending to the garden, folding laundry as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was burning with satisfaction. Every time I saw his scowl, every time he muttered curses under his breath, I knew I had won a battle he thought I couldn't even fight. And then, just when I thought he would dig in deeper, something unexpected happened. One evening, I came home from visiting my daughter to find flowers on the table. A vase full of roses, red, his old favorite gift. And there he was, standing in the kitchen with a sheepish smile, like a schoolboy caught in mischief. "Margaret," he said, his tone soft, almost pleading. "Maybe we should start over." I stared at him, unable to hide my disbelief. "Start over? After everything you've done?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I made a mistake. I got greedy, I lost sight of what matters. Let's forget the lawyers. Let's forget the paperwork. We can make this work. Please." I nearly laughed. 3 weeks after filing for divorce, after scheming to take my house and throw me out, suddenly he wanted reconciliation? But I didn't laugh. Instead, I smiled sweetly and said, "Maybe, David. Maybe we can try again. That was my silent revenge. I let him think he had charmed his way back in. I let him believe his apologies and flowers had softened me. I cooked his favorite meals, folded his shirts neatly, and even sat beside him on the couch as he rambled about the news. What he didn't know was that every smile, every gentle nod, was part of my act. Behind the mask, I was already separating other assets, moving money into accounts he couldn't touch, and quietly preparing for the day I would leave him for good. David thought he had regained control. He thought he had outsmarted me again. But in truth, I was already 10 steps ahead. And then one night, as I stood washing dishes, I heard him in the next room on the phone again. His voice was low, careful, but I caught enough to make my stomach twist. "Don't worry," he said. "She thinks we're fine now. I'll fix this. I'll get what I need one way or another." I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles white, my heart pounding. So it wasn't over. His plan had backfired, but he wasn't done scheming. And I knew then, the war between us had only just begun. If you had walked into our house in those weeks after David's furious outburst, you might have thought we were just another long-married couple finding our rhythm again. Fresh flowers on the table, warm meals on the stove, polite conversations over coffee. To outsiders, it looked like reconciliation. But inside, it was nothing but a performance. David brought home roses, chocolates, even a few pieces of jewelry he thought would distract me. He put on a show of kindness, asking me about my day, offering to fix little things around the house. It would have fooled anyone else, but I knew better. Behind his smiles, I saw the bitterness in his eyes. Behind his gifts, I felt the desperation in his touch. He wasn't trying to win me back because he loved me. He was trying to buy time, to recover from a plan that had collapsed in his face. And I played along. One Sunday morning, we went to church together for the first time in months. Neighbors greeted us with surprise and delight. "It's so good to see you both together again," Mrs. Howard said, patting my hand. I smiled politely and replied, "Yes, we're working things out." David beamed like a man reborn. But I noticed the way his smile stiffened when people asked too many questions. He was desperate for appearances, desperate to look like a husband who had simply stumbled, not one who had plotted to strip his wife of everything she owned. But whispers had already started. At coffee hour, I overheard two women murmuring near the pastry table. "Did you hear about the Lawsons?" Someone said David filed, then pulled it back. "Really? At his age? What on earth is going on in that house?" Their voices faded when they saw me, but their eyes lingered. And I thought to myself, good. Let him squirm under the weight of gossip. Let people wonder. Because the truth was slowly seeping out, whether he liked it or not. At home, the cracks in his performance began to show. One night, after dinner, I heard him slamming drawers in his office. Papers scattered across the floor, his voice rising as he barked into the phone. "I don't care what it takes," he snapped. "Find another way. I need leverage, damn it." I stood quietly in the hallway, listening. My heart beat steady now, not with fear, but with a strange calm. His anger no longer scared me, it confirmed that I had won the first battle. Later, when he emerged from the office, his face red and sweaty, I asked gently, "Everything all right, dear?" He forced a smile. "Of course. Just business." I hummed, pretending to believe him. But inside, I thought, your business is failing, David. And I'm watching every move you make. The more he tried to act loving, the more obvious his cracks became. At dinner, his fork clattered against the plate when I mentioned visiting Rachel again. At night, he tossed and turned, muttering in his sleep, Sometimes, he woke drenched in sweat, staring at me as if I were a stranger lying beside him. I knew the truth, he was unraveling. But I didn't rush. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is quiet, patient, letting the other person collapse under the weight of their own schemes. So I kept playing the role. The devoted wife. The woman grateful for roses and polite smiles. All the while, I moved money into accounts under my own name, made copies of important documents, and spoke discreetly with my lawyer. David thought he was regaining control. But really, I was building an exit so clean he wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The breaking point came one night at dinner. We sat across from each other, the air thick with silence. I asked him how his day was. He snapped, slamming his fork onto the table. "Stop asking me questions, Margaret. Just stop." I froze, then slowly set down my napkin. "I was just making conversation," I said softly. His eyes blazed with fury, but I saw something else behind it, fear. He was cracking, and he knew it. He pushed away from the table and stormed into his office, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I sat alone at the table, staring at his half-eaten plate of food, and whispered to myself, "You've lost, David. You just don't know it yet." But I couldn't relax. Because in the days that followed, his anger turned into something darker. He began leaving the house for longer stretches, returning late into the night. His eyes darted when I asked where he'd been. And one evening, I caught the faint smell of perfume on his jacket, perfume that wasn't mine. My stomach turned, not out of jealousy, but out of certainty. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was desperate. And desperate men do reckless things. I realized then that my quiet victory might not be enough. If I wanted true freedom, I would have to prepare for the final strike. And as I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at my own reflection, I promised myself one thing. The next move will be mine. And when I make it, David Lawson will never see it coming. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. David had his shouting, his slammed doors, his angry phone calls. But me? I had my silence, and it was far more dangerous than he realized. While he raged in his office, I moved like a shadow through the house, setting myself free one careful step at a time. The first thing I did was open a bank account in my own name. I hadn't had one in years. David always insisted we didn't need separate accounts. But this time, I walked into the branch downtown with my head high and a folder full of documents Rachel had helped me prepare. The banker smiled politely. "And what would you like to do today, ma'am?" "I'd like to open a personal account," I said firmly. As I signed the papers, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost decades ago. For once, the money I put in would be mine alone, not subject to David's prying eyes or greedy hands. The next step was securing documents. Late at night, when he was asleep, I quietly gathered birth certificates, the deed copies Rachel had given me, insurance policies, and even the title to the old car in the garage. I slipped them into a folder and hid it in a box labeled Christmas lights in the attic. David never set foot up there. I also began keeping a small notebook tucked into my purse. In it, I recorded every strange thing David did, every late night, every angry phone call, every slip of perfume that wasn't mine. If he ever tried to twist the story, I would have my record ready. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the doting wife. I cooked his favorite roast chicken, laughed softly at his forced jokes, and even let him take my hand when neighbors visited. But inside, I was steel. Every time he smiled at me with that false sweetness, I smiled back and thought, "You have no idea, David. You think you're winning, but I'm already gone." The cracks in his act widened. One night, he came home past midnight. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and when he kissed me on the cheek, I caught the faintest trace of lipstick near his collar. I didn't say a word. Another night, I overheard him on the phone again. "She thinks everything's fine now. Don't worry, I'll figure out a way. I always do." The arrogance in his voice made my skin crawl. But instead of fear, I felt an odd sense of peace. Let him think he still had control. Let him think I was blind. The more confident he felt, the easier it was for me to prepare. Rachel checked in with me often. "Are you ready, Maggie? If things go south, you need to be prepared to walk out without looking back." "I'm ready," I told her. And I meant it. Because by then, I had already begun imagining my life without him. Quiet mornings on my daughter's porch. Watching my grandchildren play in the yard. Living in peace, without walking on eggshells every time a door slammed. It wasn't just about saving the house anymore. It was about saving myself. The community started to see through David's mask, too. At church, I noticed the way people looked at him differently, their whispers sharper, their smiles colder. He hated it. One Sunday, when a neighbor joked about the Lawsons patching things up, I saw the flicker of anger in his eyes. He hated being pitted. He hated being doubted. And that made me smile inside. Because for years, he had chipped away at my dignity in private. Now, for the first time, he was the one being judged. But with every day that passed, I saw him growing more desperate. His calls grew angrier, his temper shorter. He paced the house at night, muttering to himself. I knew that sooner or later, his mask would slip completely. And when it did, I had to be ready. One evening, as I stood by the window, sipping tea, I caught him watching me from across the room. His eyes weren't just angry anymore, they were calculating, cold, the eyes of a man searching for one last chance to strike. For the first time, a chill ran through me. He wasn't just trying to hurt me with papers or property anymore. No, David Lawson was planning something darker. And I realized then, my silent preparations might not just be about saving my house. They might be about saving my life. It started with little comments. "You've been out a lot lately, Margaret. Who are you really seeing?" he asked one evening, his eyes narrowing as I put away groceries. "My daughter," I answered simply. He scoffed. "Funny. You never visited her this much before." I ignored him, but inside, I knew he was catching on. He could feel me slipping away, and it terrified him. The next few days were worse. He followed me from room to room, hovering like a shadow. He checked the mail before I could, lingered by the phone when I was on calls, and even rifled through my purse when he thought I wasn't looking. "Why are you writing things down?" he barked one night, pointing to the notebook I kept near my chair. "It's just notes," I said calmly, sliding it out of his reach. He glared at me, his jaw tight. "You're planning something." I met his eyes, steady as stone. "Maybe I am." For the first time in years, I watched his face pale. The confrontation came on a rainy Thursday evening. The house was quiet except for the storm outside. I was making tea when he stormed into the kitchen, his fists clenched, his eyes wild. "You think you've beaten me, don't you?" he growled. I set down the kettle and looked at him. "I don't think, David. I know." His face twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything. I was supposed to start over. That house, the money, it was all supposed to be mine." The words tumbled out of him like poison. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. "You were going to throw me out," I whispered. Yes, he snapped. And I still might. Don't underestimate me, Margaret. You may have outsmarted me once, but this isn't over. For a moment, fear shot through me. His eyes weren't just angry, they were unhinged. But then, something stronger rose in me, calm defiance. Do whatever you like, David, I said, my voice steady. But understand this, you'll never get that house. It's gone. And soon, so am I. He froze, staring at me as if I had struck him. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. I leaned closer, my voice low. Watch me. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. He paced the hallways like a restless ghost, muttering under his breath, slamming doors, making calls in hushed tones. I lay awake, listening, every nerve on edge. By morning, the community knew something was wrong. At church that Sunday, I noticed the way people looked at me with quiet sympathy, then looked at him with suspicion. A friend from choir leaned close and whispered, Maggie, if you ever need a place to stay, you come straight to me. David's face burned red when he overheard. He hated the whispers, the pity, the judgment. But this time, it wasn't me the community was doubting. It was him. The final blow came at a family dinner. Our daughter, Emily, had invited us over. The grandchildren played in the living room while we sat around the table. Emily looked at me, her voice gentle. Mom, are you all right? You seem different. Before I could answer, David snapped, she's fine. Don't put ideas in her head. Emily frowned. I wasn't asking you, Dad. I was asking her. The silence that followed was deafening. And in that silence, I realized, the truth was out. My daughter saw it. The grandchildren would see it one day. The mask David wore for the world had finally cracked. On the drive home, he didn't speak. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought it might break. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned to me, his face shadowed in the dark. You've humiliated me, he whispered. In front of everyone. My plan may have failed, but don't think for a second that you've won. You'll regret this. I stared back at him, unflinching. The only thing I regret is wasting 42 years on a man who never truly loved me. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white, but he said nothing. He stormed inside, slamming the door behind him. I sat in the car for a long time, listening to the rain pound against the windshield, and realized something chilling. David wasn't finished. He had lost the house. He had lost the community's respect. But a man that desperate still had one weapon left. And I feared what he might do with it. I always knew it would come to this. A desperate man will always make one last move, even when the game is already lost. And David Lawson was nothing if not desperate. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air is holding its breath. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I heard him slam the front door. He stormed in with wild eyes and papers clutched in his hand. You think you've won, don't you? He shouted. I set the dish towel down calmly. David, lower your voice. He threw the papers onto the table. I went back to the lawyer. I can still challenge the transfer. I can prove you acted in bad faith. You'll lose everything. I looked down at the papers, my heart steady, not racing this time. Because what David didn't know was that I had already prepared for this exact strike. Rachel had made sure everything was airtight, legal, beyond his reach. You're wasting your time, I said softly. And your money. His face turned red. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I built this life. You were nothing without me. That was it. That was the line that broke whatever fear I had left. I stepped closer, looking him dead in the eye. I was never nothing, David. You just didn't want to see my worth. And now, you've lost everything you tried to steal. He stared at me, his chest heaving. For a moment, I thought he might lunge forward. My hands trembled at my sides, but I didn't move. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me afraid. And then, just like that, his fury cracked. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. The once proud man who thought he could outsmart me looked small, broken, pitiful. You destroyed me, he whispered. No, I replied firmly. You destroyed yourself. I just refused to go down with you. The days that followed sealed his downfall. Word spread quickly around Columbus that David had filed for divorce, tried to strip me of my inheritance, and failed spectacularly. Neighbors shook their heads when they saw him. Old friends stopped calling. Even his business partners began to distance themselves. Meanwhile, I held my head high. I visited Emily and the grandchildren, sitting on her porch, feeling the weight of years lift off my shoulders. For the first time in decades, I felt free. But here's the part that surprised me most: David withdrew his final challenge. Maybe it was shame, maybe exhaustion, but he stopped fighting. One day, he simply handed me the signed papers and muttered, "Do whatever you want. I'm done." And that was it. 42 years of marriage ended not with a bang, but with a broken man admitting defeat. I walked away with the house secured, my finances safe, and my dignity intact. More importantly, I walked away with my power. For years, I had felt invisible, unheard, forgotten. But betrayal has a strange way of waking you up. David thought he could steal everything from me, but instead, he gave me the one thing I never thought I'd find again: myself. Now, when I sit on my daughter's porch, watching my grandchildren chase each other across the lawn, I feel nothing but peace. The house, the one my father left me, is safe in their hands. My story won't be erased by a greedy man's plan. David still lives in town. Sometimes I see him at the grocery store, his shoulders hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. People whisper about him, not me. And I can't help but think, that's its own kind of justice. I didn't get revenge with screaming or fighting. I got it by outsmarting him, by staying calm, by protecting what was mine. Revenge doesn't always mean destroying the other person, it can simply mean refusing to let them destroy you. And if you've listened to my story this far, remember this: never underestimate a woman who has been betrayed. Sometimes, the quietest voice is the strongest weapon. Now I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you forgive a man like David? Or would you walk away forever, holding your head high like I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I had been waiting for it, the moment when David would finally stop pretending, stop playing at reconciliation, and show me just how far he was willing to go. You can always tell when a storm is about to break. The air gets heavier, the silence thicker. That's how the house felt that week. He hardly spoke to me, but when he did, his words were sharp, clipped, like a knife pressed against skin. I could see it in his eyes, he wasn't finished. A man like David, proud and greedy, doesn't just walk away quietly. And I was right. It was a Tuesday evening when it finally happened. The rain had just stopped, leaving the street outside slick and shining under the lampposts. I was in the living room, folding laundry, when I heard the front door bang open. David stormed in, clutching a stack of papers, his face twisted with fury. "You thought you could beat me?" he spat, slamming the papers down on the coffee table. "Well, think again." I didn't move. I kept folding a towel, steady and calm, even though my heart raced. He jabbed a finger at the papers. I talked to another lawyer. They say I can contest the transfer. I can drag you through court, Margaret. You'll be drained dry before it's over. I set the towel aside and looked him straight in the eye. Then you waste your time and your money. Because that house is gone, David. You'll never touch it again. For a moment, he froze. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, and I knew he realized what I already knew, that Rachel had made the transfer airtight. But instead of backing down, his fury boiled over. He swept the papers off the table, scattering them across the floor. You destroyed me, he shouted. You made me a fool in front of everyone. I stood, my voice steady. No, David. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped letting you drag me down with you. The fight drained out of him all at once. He collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. For years I had seen him as strong, commanding, always in control. But that night, I saw him for what he really was, a broken man who had gambled everything on greed and lost. You'll regret this, he muttered through clenched teeth. I shook my head. The only thing I regret is giving you 42 years of my life. But even that regret won't follow me anymore. I'm free now. After that night, David stopped fighting. He went through the motions, meeting with his lawyers, but the fire was gone. He withdrew his petition quietly, no speeches, no demands. Just a broken man shuffling papers he no longer had the energy to defend. The community knew. Word had spread about his failed scheme. At the grocery store, people greeted me warmly but gave him cold, pitying looks. At church, neighbors whispered, shaking their heads when he passed. For once, I wasn't the one walking with my head bowed. He was. I won't lie, there was a bittersweetness to it all. This was a man I had once loved deeply. We had children together, memories together, decades of life woven between us. But betrayal kills love, and what he had done left no room for forgiveness. So I didn't rage at him. I didn't curse him. I simply let him collapse under the weight of his own choices. And I walked away with my dignity intact. Now, my life is quieter, but in that quiet, I have found peace. I sit on my daughter Emily's porch, watching my grandchildren play in the yard, their laughter filling the air. I look at the house behind them, the house that almost slipped away, and I feel nothing but gratitude. It is safe. It is theirs. And no one, not even David Lawson, can ever take it from us again. Sometimes I see him around town. His shoulders slump now, his eyes dart away when he spots me. He lives in a small apartment near the edge of the city, far from the house he once thought he would sell for profit. I don't feel pity. I don't feel anger. I feel nothing. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as standing your ground, protecting what is yours, and letting the other person ruin themselves. And if you've listened this far, let me leave you with this: never underestimate the strength of a woman who has been betrayed. We may bend, but we do not break. And when the time comes, we rise stronger than anyone expects. Now I'll ask you, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you forgive a man like David, or would you walk away forever, the way I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.